The night she tried to destroy my dignity began with a silver spoon hitting the floor. The clang of that spoon still echoes in my mind. It wasn't just a sound, it was the start of my humiliation. Everyone froze around the dinner table, crystal glasses shimmering under the chandelier, pretending not to notice the tension thick enough to choke on. I remember sitting there, my palms sweating, trying to hold my composure as my mother-in-law's cold eyes met mine. She smiled, the kind of smile that hides poison behind pearls. "Accidents happen, dear," she said sweetly, yet every word was dipped in mockery. I knew what she meant. Nothing in that house was accidental. That dinner wasn't just about family, it was a stage. Every dish, every toast, every laugh was rehearsed perfection. But I didn't belong to their perfection. To them, I was the outsider who had married their precious son, the girl from a smaller family, who should have been grateful just to sit at their table. Inside, I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I sat there, smiling faintly, while whispers danced around me like smoke. Every comment, every fake laugh felt like another thread pulling at my dignity. I watched my husband avoid my eyes, pretending not to notice how his mother's praise for real Carter women cut straight through me. "Respect is earned, Emily," she said once, her voice calm but sharp. "Not married into." That line haunted me for months. But that night, when the spoon hit the floor, I realized something. This wasn't about earning respect. It was about surviving their game of pride and reputation. And for the first time, I felt the quiet fire of revenge rise inside me. Because if that dinner was her show of power, then my silence would soon become her greatest humiliation. I used to think the Carter family was everything I ever dreamed of, elegant, united, almost royal in how they carried themselves. Their house wasn't just a home, it was a symbol. Polished floors, portraits of ancestors in gold frames, the kind of place where even silence felt rehearsed. When I first walked in as Richard's new wife, I thought I was stepping into love's reward. Instead, I was stepping into an illusion carefully built on pride. Margaret Carter, my mother-in-law, ran that house like a queen guarding her throne. Every Sunday dinner was her performance, complete with perfect table settings, her pearls gleaming, her tone warm yet watchful. She had a way of making everyone feel welcome, yet subtly reminded them who owned the room. "Family means everything," she would say, her hand resting on Richard's shoulder, not mine. The message was clear. I might carry their name, but I would never carry her approval. Richard adored his mother, maybe too much. He called her every morning before leaving for work, asking about her day as if she were the fragile one. And I tried to blend in. I helped in the kitchen, offered to set the table, even baked her favorite lemon pie once. She smiled, took one polite bite, and said, "It's good, dear. Not like mine, but good." The others laughed softly, thinking it harmless. But those tiny moments, those soft cuts, built walls between us. Sarah, my sister-in-law, was no different. She had a way of looking me up and down, like she was measuring how much I didn't belong. "You're quiet, Emily," she once said during a family brunch. "Mother says quiet people always have secrets." I smiled, pretending it didn't sting. "Maybe I just prefer listening," I replied. She laughed. "Oh, that's what guilty people say." I laughed too, but something inside me cracked. I watched how they treated others. The warmth in their voices when relatives visited, the affection they showed Sarah's husband, the pride in how they spoke about their family traditions. But when it came to me, there was always restraint. My presence seemed to remind them of something they couldn't control, love that Richard chose on his own, not one his mother arranged or approved. And then there was Uncle George, Margaret's older brother. He was quiet, observant, the kind of man who said little but saw everything. Once, when everyone was laughing over wine, he leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't take her words to heart, Emily. Some people only feel powerful when they make others small." I looked at him in surprise, but he just sipped his drink, eyes distant. At first, I told myself things would change. That love could soften her pride. I bought gifts on birthdays, remembered anniversaries, even made photo albums of family moments. But every effort was met with a colder smile. I started noticing how Margaret would correct me in front of guests, small things like how I folded napkins or served tea. She'd chuckle and say, "Don't worry, she's still learning how we do things in the Carter family." In that house, even kindness felt like a test. My parents noticed the change in me. When I visited home one weekend, my mother asked, "Are you happy, Emily?" "Truly." I forced a smile and said, They are just different. It takes time. She looked at me with that knowing sadness only mothers have. Just don't lose yourself trying to please people who never intended to love you. I should have listened. Weeks later, another dinner was arranged, larger than usual. Margaret called it a family appreciation evening. I helped plan it, thinking maybe this was my chance to finally be accepted. I spent hours decorating, setting candles, arranging flowers the way she liked. When guests arrived, the laughter, the chatter, the glow, it all felt like a dream. Margaret even introduced me with a smile. "This is Emily, my daughter-in-law," she said. "She's learning our ways so beautifully." I almost believed her. But then, as I served dessert, I noticed the glance she exchanged with Sarah, a silent smirk that told me something was coming. A cold shiver ran through me. Margaret raised her glass, eyes glinting in the candlelight. "To family," she said, pausing just long enough for the room to quiet. "And to those who remember where they came from." Everyone laughed, except me. I didn't understand what she meant, at least not yet. That night, as I cleared the plates and listened to their laughter fading down the hallway, something inside me whispered that the warmth I felt wasn't real. Behind every smile was a secret. And behind every toast to family, there was a trap waiting for me to fall into. It started with whispers, soft, poisonous words that floated through the halls of the Carter mansion like perfume. They always said it behind closed doors, never loud enough to confront, just enough for me to hear echoes. "She's too quiet, too ambitious, probably married him for money." The words were always the same, but they hit differently every time. At first, I ignored them. I told myself families take time to warm up. But it wasn't just coldness anymore, it was calculation. Margaret didn't just dislike me, she wanted others to see me as a mistake. It began the week Richard's grandmother's will was discussed. Everyone gathered in the formal living room. Crystal glasses on the coffee table, sunlight slanting through the lace curtains, the air thick with curiosity. Margaret sat at the head, calm as ever, while the family lawyer read aloud the old woman's wishes. There were properties, jewelry, bonds, all neatly divided. Richard was meant to inherit a portion, modest but fair. But Margaret interrupted. "Actually, we might need to reconsider that clause," she said, pretending confusion. "Mother never met Emily properly. I don't think she'd want the family estate tainted by external influence." The lawyer looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Carter, these are final documents." She smiled. "Oh, I'm sure my son's wife won't mind proving her worth first." Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. Richard looked at me, unsure. His silence screamed louder than her cruelty. That was the moment I understood. Margaret was drawing lines, dividing the family in front of me, and Richard was too afraid to erase them. In the days that followed, small humiliations became routine. At family breakfasts, she'd compliment Sarah's cooking, then turn to me and say, "Some people just don't have the natural touch." During gatherings, she'd tell stories about Richard's ex, how graceful she was, how perfectly she fit our family image. Every word was a reminder that I was temporary. One afternoon, Sarah cornered me in the hallway. "You should have seen it coming," she said, folding her arms. "Mother always wanted Richard to marry someone from our circle. You don't really fit." I forced a smile. "I didn't marry your circle, Sarah. I married Richard." She leaned in. "And that's exactly the problem." Those words followed me everywhere. The worst came a few days later, when Margaret invited her charity friends over. I thought it was a chance to rebuild things, so I dressed carefully, helped serve tea, and smiled when spoken to. But then, in front of those guests, Margaret asked, "Emily, dear, remind us again where your parents live? Such a modest town, wasn't it?" I froze. The laughter around the table was polite but cruel. One woman whispered, "How quaint." My cheeks burned. "Yes," I said softly, "it's a small town, but it taught me how to respect people." Margaret smiled, unfazed. "Of course, dear. That's why we love your simplicity." Her words dripped with disdain. Everyone laughed again. Later that night, I cried quietly in the guest bathroom, careful not to make a sound. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. My reflection in the mirror looked hollow, my eyes red, my smile forced. I whispered to myself, "This isn't a family, it's a performance." And the worst part? Richard didn't even ask what was wrong. A few days later, A rumor began circulating among extended relatives that I had mishandled Richard's accounts, that I'd taken money from our joint fund without telling him. It was absurd, but it spread fast. When I confronted Richard, his words sliced through me. Mom said she found inconsistencies. She's just worried, that's all. I stared at him, disbelief turning to rage. So you think I'd steal from you? From us? He hesitated. I just think we should be more transparent. For the family's sake. The family's sake, I repeated. You mean your mother's approval? He didn't deny it. That night, I found Margaret in the living room, sipping tea by the fire. You're spreading lies about me, I said, my voice shaking. She didn't even look surprised. I'm protecting my son. Money changes people, dear. I've seen it. I've changed because of you, I said quietly. She smiled that same polished smile. Then my job as a mother is done. Something inside me broke in that moment, not my heart, but my tolerance. I realized her mission wasn't to push me away. It was to destroy my name within the family, to erase my dignity until even I doubted it. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of Uncle George standing by the doorway. His face was pale, his jaw tight. You've gone too far, Margaret, he said. She turned sharply. Stay out of this. But he didn't. He looked at me and said softly, You should check your husband's account, Emily. The truth isn't what they are telling you. My breath caught. What do you mean? He walked away without answering. That night, I opened our bank records. What I found made my stomach twist, large withdrawals under my name, but none made by me. Someone had forged my signature. And that was when I realized. Margaret hadn't just humiliated me. She was framing me. Every family gathering after that became a battlefield I had to walk through smiling. The Carters didn't fight with shouting or slammed doors. They fought with glances, whispers, and well-timed silences that could cut through bone. It began with the Sunday brunch that followed the rumor. Margaret decided to host her charity circle again, insisting I shouldn't stress over serving. I knew what that meant. I was being benched, quietly sidelined like a servant who'd disappointed the queen. She made Sarah pour the tea, made her the center of every conversation. I stood near the kitchen door, watching Sarah bask in her approval. Sarah, Margaret said proudly, you remind me so much of myself when I was your age, so graceful, so reliable. Her eyes flicked to me. Not everyone adjusts to family expectations so easily. The women chuckled softly. I felt my throat tighten. Would anyone like more sugar? I asked, forcing a smile, pretending her words didn't slice through me. Margaret didn't answer. She simply turned to her friends. She's so polite, she said sweetly, though sometimes politeness hides guilt, don't you think? A few heads nodded, as if agreeing to something unspoken. That day, I realized how carefully she crafted her humiliations. Nothing direct enough to accuse her of cruelty, just subtle enough that, if I protested, I'd seem hysterical. After brunch, I walked into the hallway to find Richard waiting. I expected comfort. Instead, I found more distance. Emily, maybe just give her space for a while, he said softly. She's under a lot of pressure. I laughed bitterly. She's under pressure? I'm the one being accused, Richard. He sighed. Look, I'm trying to keep the peace. Don't make this harder. Harder? My voice cracked. She's turning your family against me, and you're asking me to make it easier. He didn't reply. He just walked away. That silence hurt more than any insult Margaret could throw. Weeks passed. The tension grew thick enough to suffocate me. Every day felt like a test I was destined to fail. Sarah stopped speaking to me altogether, except to deliver her mother's messages. Mom said not to worry about the guest list for next month's dinner. You can just focus on your work. My work. I repeated. You mean staying out of sight? She smirked. You said it, not me. The humiliation became public during Richard's birthday celebration. Margaret invited nearly 50 people, family, business partners, friends from their charity circles. The entire mansion was dressed in gold and laughter. I wore a simple black dress, hoping to blend in. But the moment I entered the room, I felt it, the shift, the stares. Margaret was standing by the grand piano, holding a champagne flute. Everyone, she called out, her voice bright. Before we toast to my wonderful son, I'd like to address a small misunderstanding that's been circulating. My stomach dropped. She continued, "You all know how much we value honesty in this family. Sadly, not everyone shares that value. Some recent, financial missteps have caused unnecessary embarrassment." Her eyes met mine. "But we've chosen forgiveness. After all, every family has its weak link." Laughter rippled through the crowd. My hands trembled. I wanted to scream, to tell them the truth, but I could barely breathe. Richard's expression was unreadable, frozen between guilt and fear. I whispered, "You knew she'd say this." He didn't answer. When I couldn't bear it anymore, I stepped outside to the garden, the laughter still echoing behind me. I stood beneath the dim porch light, trying not to cry. Uncle George followed me out a few minutes later. "She's gone too far," he said quietly. "You don't deserve this." "I'm done trying to deserve anything," I whispered. "I just want my name back." He nodded slowly. "Then you'll need proof. And strength. Both are hard to come by in that house." His words planted something inside me, a cold, steady determination. But the cruelty didn't stop. 2 days later, I found one of Richard's friends, a man named Mark, avoiding me at the grocery store. When I approached him, he looked uneasy. "Emily, I don't want to get involved, but Margaret's been telling people you forged checks. That you're unstable." My blood ran cold. "She what?" "She even said you're seeing someone else." I felt my knees weaken. "That's a lie." He nodded sadly. "I know. But she's convincing." That night, I confronted Richard again, holding back tears. "Your mother is destroying me, Richard. She's turning me into a villain." He rubbed his forehead. "You're overreacting. Mom's just emotional sometimes." I stared at him in disbelief. "She's framing me. She forged my signature. You saw the withdrawals." He looked away. "You can't prove that." That was the moment I stopped recognizing the man I married. Days later, as I cleaned up the dining room after another silent dinner, I noticed something glinting beneath the sideboard, a folded piece of paper. When I opened it, my hands went numb. It was a copy of a bank statement, but not mine. It was Margaret's, and it showed the money she'd accused me of taking, transferred directly to her charity. And at the bottom, in her handwriting, were the words, "Proof for the dinner." Dinner. Another one. She was planning something bigger. I stood there, trembling, holding that piece of evidence that could finally expose her. But something inside me whispered that if I struck too soon, she'd twist it again. I needed to be careful. So I folded it gently and tucked it into my purse, my heart pounding. The night of Margaret's Thanksgiving dinner was supposed to be about gratitude. That's what she called it when she announced it, gratitude. But in that house, every celebration was a disguise. I didn't know it yet, but this one would be the night she took everything from me. The mansion glowed that evening. Chandeliers glittered like crowns, and the scent of roasted herbs floated through the hall. Guests filled every corner, relatives, business partners, neighbors who lived to gossip. Laughter bounced off marble floors, polished to reflect perfection. But beneath it all, I could feel it, a quiet current of tension aimed straight at me. Richard looked uneasy, pacing near the piano. When I asked if something was wrong, he said, "Mom just wants the family to clear the air tonight. Don't be defensive." Clear the air. I should have known that meant my humiliation. Margaret appeared in a deep emerald gown, her pearls gleaming like trophies. She kissed both my cheeks and whispered, "Let's keep things civilized, shall we?" The dinner began like a performance. Toasts, laughter, perfectly timed compliments. I sat at the far end of the table, my smile brittle, my stomach knotted. I noticed Sarah filming parts of the evening on her phone, smoking each time the camera passed me. Then, as dessert was served, Margaret stood. Her voice was calm, almost kind. "Before we end the night, I'd like to address something personal. It's difficult, but truth always is." The room fell silent. She turned to me, holding up a stack of papers. "Emily, dear, since you're part of this family, we need clarity. These documents," she waved them lightly, "show financial transactions from Richard's account. Large sums, missing since last spring. All withdrawn under your name." A murmur spread through the guests. I froze. "That's not true," I said softly. "Those aren't mine." Margaret smiled gently. "Denial doesn't erase evidence, sweetheart. We found your signature. Twice." "I never." She cut me off.
It's all right. Mistakes happen.
But I can't allow such carelessness to stain the Carter name. Laughter rippled again, soft, judgmental. I looked to Richard, desperate for him to speak. But he just stared at the table, his hands trembling. Richard, I whispered, you know I didn't do this. Tell them. He finally looked up, his eyes filled with shame, but not for what they'd done to me.
Maybe you didn't mean to, he said quietly. My heart stopped.
You think I stole from you?
His silence was my answer.
I stood there, surrounded by their elegant cruelty, my world collapsing in whispers and candlelight. Every face at that table looked at me with pity or disgust. Sarah recorded the entire scene, pretending it was for memory's sake.
Tears blurred my vision.
You're all wrong, I said, my voice shaking. This isn't truth, it's theater.
Margaret tilted her head.
If that's so, my dear, then you've been the lead actress all along. The room erupted in soft laughter. I felt my chest tighten, my breath catching. It wasn't just humiliation, it was erasure. They were rewriting who I was, turning me into a liar, a thief.
I couldn't stay. My body moved before my mind did. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the marble.
I hope one day, I said, my voice steadying, you all see the monster behind the manners.
Margaret smiled thinly.
And I hope one day you learn humility. I left the table in silence.
No one stopped me. Not even Richard.
The night air outside was cold, sharp. I walked down the driveway barefoot, my heels dangling from my hand. Behind me, the house still glowed, gold, perfect, heartless. Each window flickered with laughter that no longer included me. I reached the gate and finally broke. The sobs came in waves, raw, trembling, uncontrollable. Every word she'd said echoed in my head. Weak link. Mistakes happen. Humility. I didn't know where to go. My parents lived hours away. My friends had long stopped visiting. Margaret made sure of that. I sat by the road until the moon blurred behind my tears. That night, I was stripped of everything, my name, my marriage, my place in that family. Even the house I lived in no longer felt mine. Days passed like fog. Richard stayed silent. No apology, no explanation, just distance. The family cut me off completely. Margaret spread her story everywhere. Within a week, her version became truth. Emily Carter, the ungrateful wife who betrayed them. I received a letter from their lawyer soon after, a polite document that sliced through my last hope. Richard had filed for separation. I was being removed from all shared accounts, my name erased from the inheritance registry. It was official. I was disowned. When I told my mother, she cried quietly. Come home, Emily, she said. Let it go. But I couldn't. Letting go meant letting her win. That night, as I packed my things, I opened my purse to find the folded piece of paper I'd hidden weeks before, Margaret's bank statement, the one showing the missing funds. I stared at it, the ink faint but clear. My hands stopped shaking for the first time in days. The betrayal still burned, but beneath it, something new stirred, a quiet, cold focus. I whispered to myself, she used the truth to destroy me, now I'll use the truth to destroy her. And in that silence, surrounded by the ruins of my life, I made a promise, not out of hatred, but justice. They thought they'd buried me in shame, but all they'd done was plant a seed. After they disowned me, the world narrowed to a few sharp things. The folded paper in my purse, the ache in my chest, and the cold little voice in my head that wouldn't let me be small. For days I let myself feel every bruise, anger, shame, the dizzy sorrow of being erased. But grief is a dangerous place to camp. One morning I woke with a clarity that felt like a new bone. Grief would not be my ending. It would be my instruction. I started with the smallest, safest things. I read the bank statement again and again until the dates and line items were etched into me. I made copies, photographed receipts, cross-checked transfers with public records. I learned the language of spreadsheets and statements the way someone learns the contours of a wound, carefully, methodically. Uncle George became my first ally. He slid into my kitchen one rain-soaked afternoon with a thermos and a look that meant he'd thought the better of staying quiet. You shouldn't have been the only one to see this, he said, pressing a thin envelope into my hand. Inside were notes he'd taken, names, dates, odd transfers that matched the missing funds. I've watched her tell the story for years, he murmured. I kept my mouth because I was afraid. I'm not afraid anymore. His hands trembled, and for the first time since the dinner, I felt less alone. I made a list. Evidence. Witnesses. Motive. Margaret's charity had receipts that led to shell accounts, donors who'd never actually given, invoices in her handwriting. I found a pattern. Generous donations that never reached beneficiaries, funds rerouted through the family's business accounts. Each discovery pulled me further from the woman who only knew how to perform dignity, and closer to someone who could expose it. I contacted a lawyer, an honest, sharp woman who didn't flinch at the word fraud. If you have proof they fabricated signatures and misdirected funds, she said, tapping the folder I'd brought, we can force disclosure. We can make them answer in public. Her calm steadied me. Legal steps were one thing. Truth on paper meant fewer ways for Margaret to twist the story. But I knew the law alone wouldn't be enough. Margaret's power lived in reputation and rumor. She'd turned whispers into an army. So I planned not just to prove her lies, but to break the illusion she hid behind. I would do something public, something she couldn't stage manage. It had to be a place where her supporters would witness their own complicity, a gala, a charity board meeting, a family reunion with a live stream. I imagined her face when a room full of people who trusted her would hear facts, not flattery. There were risks. If I moved too fast, she'd bury the evidence. If I moved too slow, she'd fabricate more. And worse, if I failed, I would only deepen the humiliation. The thought made my hands go cold, but it also sharpened my resolve. I rehearsed what I would say, not loud, not vengeful, but clear and precise. I did not steal from my husband. I would tell them. You were lied to. I practiced the voice that felt most dangerous, controlled, unmistakable. I collected witnesses who could attest to Margaret's behavior. Former charity employees, a bookkeeper who'd left under suspicious circumstances, and Mark, the friend who'd witnessed her whispering lies at the grocery store. Each person I persuaded was another stitch in a net that could hold her accountable. I also prepared for the personal cost. Richard might deny me. Some relatives might turn further away. But I realized I no longer wanted to negotiate for approval. I wanted truth. I wanted my name cleared. And if justice required me to stand alone for a while, I accepted the solitude. At night, I went through the motions of being ordinary. Cooking simple meals, sleeping in a small rented room, calling my mother and letting her worry and cry. By day, I gathered documents and built a case as if assembling a weapon, precise, clean, without malice, but with purpose. I learned to keep my face calm while my heart imagined the moment when the world would see Margaret without her makeup of manners. Uncle George gave me the last piece I'd been missing, a ledger tucked behind an old photo album, listing transfers labeled events that matched the dates of the withdrawals. He said, I don't want to watch this anymore. Use it well. I folded the ledger into my folder and felt the weight of possible justice in my hands. The plan I built was not about revenge for its own sake. It was about dignity restored. My dignity, which they had tried to turn into a spectacle. I thought of all the times I'd swallowed words to keep peace, all the times I'd smiled while being destroyed. Now, every action I took was the opposite of silence. There were moments I hesitated, standing at the top of the grand staircase, looking back at that glowing mansion where laughter once felt like belonging. I pictured Margaret's eyes, the way she'd tilt her chin when she knew she'd won. I pictured Richard's bewildered face, his failure to stand for me. Those images made my hand tighten around the folder. On the day I decided to act, my hands didn't shake. I placed the folder in a small bag, my phone with recorded witness statements in my pocket, Uncle George's ledger tucked where it wouldn't bend. I stepped out into the street, the folder heavy and warm against my hip, and felt something like a heartbeat of possibility. I was about to walk back into the room where they'd humiliated me, only this time I would not be the one exposed. It happened almost exactly 1 month after the night they ruined me. Margaret called it another family gathering, pretending the last dinner never happened. I knew what it really was, a final show of dominance. But this time, the script was mine. When I arrived, the air was thick with perfume and false laughter. The same chandelier sparkled above that same perfect table, as if mocking me. I carried a slim leather folder in my hand, my truth bound in quiet defiance. Uncle George sat near the end, avoiding Margaret's eye. Richard stood by the fireplace, hands clasped, looking lost. Emily, Margaret greeted, her voice honeyed with arrogance. You came after all. I was afraid shame might keep you away. I smiled calmly. I don't carry shame anymore, Margaret. I left it here the last time. Her smile faltered for just a second, a hairline crack. Dinner began as always, her voice leading every conversation, the rest of us orbiting her approval. I barely touched my food. My heart was pounding, but my mind was steady. Every sound, every flicker of movement felt cinematic, the calm before the storm. Finally, Margaret raised her glass. "Let's toast," she said, "to forgiveness, and to moving on with dignity." That word, dignity, hit me like thunder. I set my fork down. "You're right," I said softly. "Tonight is about dignity. But not yours." The table fell silent. I stood, my palms flat against the polished wood. "A month ago, you called me a thief in front of this family. You said I forged signatures. You said I humiliated your name. I've stayed silent since then, but silence doesn't mean guilt. It means patience." Richard whispered. "Emily, not here." "Yes, here." My voice shook but didn't break. "Because this is where she destroyed me." Margaret chuckled softly, regaining her mask. "My dear, everyone knows what happened. We don't need drama." I interrupted her. "No, we need truth." From my folder, I slid out copies of documents, bank statements, charity records, signatures that didn't match. "Here are the transactions you accused me of making. The same ones you said ruined your reputation. But they didn't go into my account. They went into yours." A collective gasp. Margaret's smile stiffened. "That's absurd." I turned to Uncle George. "Tell them." He stood slowly, unfolding a piece of paper from his jacket. I verified the transfers myself. They were funneled through her charity. Emily's name was forged. I warned her weeks ago. Margaret's face turned pale. "George, you don't know what you're saying." "Oh, I know," he said firmly. "I've watched you destroy people for years under the name of family honor." Sarah rose from her seat, trembling. "Mother, tell them this isn't true." Margaret's voice cracked. "They are twisting things. Emily has always wanted to ruin us." I pulled out my phone and pressed play. A recorded conversation filled the room. Her voice, unmistakable. "We'll blame the withdrawals on her. No one will question me. She's too meek to fight back." The room went dead silent. Richard's fork clattered against his plate. "Mom, what did you do?" Margaret's face drained of color. "You don't understand. I did this to protect you." "Protect me?" His voice broke. "You destroyed my wife's life." The shock rippled around the table like a wave. Guests exchanged glances. Whispers filled the silence that followed. For once, her power, the kind that thrived in reputation, began to crumble. I stepped closer, my voice calm but cold. "You taught me that respect is earned, not married into." "I agree. That's why tonight, you'll earn the respect you've lost, by facing what you've done." Margaret's hand trembled as she reached for her glass. "You won't win, Emily. Families forget. They always forget." I looked her straight in the eyes. "Not this time. The charity board already received the documents this morning. They are auditing your accounts. Tomorrow, your reputation will be exactly what you built it on, lies." Her glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the marble floor. Richard buried his face in his hands. Sarah began to cry. Uncle George closed his eyes, whispering a quiet prayer. I felt no joy, no triumph, just release. The weight that had crushed my chest for months lifted. Margaret sank back into her chair, her voice barely a whisper. "You'll regret this." I exhaled slowly. "No. I'll finally sleep." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. The chandelier flickered above, reflecting off the broken glass between us, the perfect metaphor for the illusion she'd guarded all her life. As I turned to leave, I heard Richard call my name. I paused but didn't look back. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. I didn't answer. Some apologies come too late. I stepped outside into the cold air, the night sky wide and merciful. Behind me, the laughter, the gossip, the control, all of it collapsed under the weight of truth. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of their judgment. For the first time, I felt clean. The days after that dinner felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful at first, just still, like the air after a storm that's torn everything open. I remember waking up the next morning and realizing I didn't have to defend myself anymore. The truth had already done it for me. The news of Margaret's exposure spread fast. The charity board suspended her position immediately. Her picture, the perfect matriarch, the smiling face of grace and community, vanished from their brochures overnight.
Local papers wrote about the scandal.
Charity fraud investigation targets prominent socialite. Every word cut deeper than anything I could have said myself. She'd built her world on control and image, and both had finally cracked. Richard called me 2 days later. His voice was heavy, softer than I'd ever heard it. "I don't know how to fix this," he said.
"You can't," I replied.
"Some things aren't meant to be fixed, just understood." He hesitated, then whispered, "You didn't deserve any of it."
"I know," I said quietly.
And for the first time, I really believed it. I never hated him, not truly.
He was weak, not wicked. But weakness can wound just as deeply.
And in the end, I didn't need his apology to heal.
I only needed to stop waiting for it.
Sarah reached out next, a short message, almost trembling.
"I'm sorry for recording that night. Mom made me."
I didn't know how cruel it would become.
I didn't reply.
Some forgiveness doesn't need to be spoken, it just lives quietly in the choice not to seek revenge twice. Uncle George came to see me a week later. "She's staying out of sight," he said softly.
"Can't face anyone.
Even her friends won't take her calls." I nodded, staring at the fading sunlight through my window. She built her power on humiliation. It's only fitting she learned what it feels like.
He smiled faintly.
"You didn't scream, you didn't destroy, and yet, you won."
I shook my head. "No, Uncle. I didn't win.
I ended it." He looked at me for a long moment before saying quietly, "Sometimes ending something is the only real victory." Life after the Carters was simple, beautifully, mercifully simple.
I moved back to my hometown, near my parents.
I took a small job at a community center, helping organize charity events, real ones, honest ones. The people there didn't care about last names or family trees. They cared about effort, kindness, sincerity. It felt strange at first, to be seen for who I was and not for what I could bring to a table of glass and gold. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'd sit on my porch and think of that house, the glittering lights, the polite laughter, the unspoken wars. And I'd realize how heavy that kind of life had been, how exhausting it was to beg for belonging. Dignity, I learned, doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from walking away when acceptance costs your self-respect. A few months later, I ran into one of Margaret's old friends at a market. She looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to greet me. "You must be Emily," she said, fumbling. "Yes," I said, smiling gently.
She lowered her eyes. "I heard what happened. I'm sorry."
"I never believed her stories about you."
I nodded. "That's all right.
The truth believes itself." She blinked, speechless, and I walked away, my heart lighter than it had been in years. As the seasons changed, so did I. The pain faded into something else. Wisdom, maybe.
A scar that didn't ache anymore. Sometimes dignity doesn't roar.
Sometimes it just breathes quietly, knowing it survived. I kept the folder, the one that held every piece of evidence, every reminder of that war, in the back of a drawer. Not as a weapon anymore, but as a testament. Proof that even when the world tries to twist your truth, silence and patience can still speak louder than lies.
I never saw Margaret again.
I heard she sold the mansion, moved to a smaller house out of town.
Some said she rarely spoke in public now.
Others said she spent her days alone, writing letters she never sent. I didn't need to know more.
Her silence was enough.
On the anniversary of that final dinner, I lit a candle. Not for her, but for myself, for the woman who had once been broken at that table and still found her way back to peace. I whispered, "You kept your dignity, even when they tried to strip it from you." And I felt a quiet warmth inside, not triumph, but grace.